Alright guys, BLM here, back with a new video, and in this video we're finally back talking about the next season of Survivor, where here I'll be doing my cast assessment for Survivor 44. Somehow the 6th season of Survivor I am doing a cast assessment for, and again I'll be doing similar coverage for 44 as I've done for the last few seasons, where again we're starting off with the cast assessment. I'll be running through all 18 players of this cast, talking about my preseason thoughts on them, and eventually giving my winner pick at the end of the video. Before we get to that, let's talk more generally about this cast, where while there are a couple standouts here and there, I don't really have this excitement for this cast I did for 43s or 41s when those two casts were announced. I feel like this just feels like a fine cast, mostly in line with recent seasons, though obviously there's a few standout things to talk about here. Now, one, I feel like this is a bit of a younger cast, or at least there aren't as many like standouts of older figures on the cast, where it feels like the majority of this cast end up being in the late 20s to early 30s, which to be fair is probably the perfect age to play Survivor, though it just feels like there's a lack of age diversity here. Though to make up for that, I do believe this is the most amount of LGBT representation we've seen in history of the show, where there are at least 5 people of the LGBT community, which is a nice statistic to see here. Though beyond that, again, it just kind of feels like more of the same of this like post-diversity mandate style of cast, which again is good, which I'm sure is still going to provide a solid cast here, especially considering how it seems like production loves this season based on everything we're hearing. So obviously I have to see how it plays out. But with that, let's finally get around to talking about the individual players. So I should mention that for the sake of this video, what I have seen from the preseason are obviously their official bios, but also their Meet the Cast videos that CBS released, which will be the main basis around my opinions for this video. Again, we have 18 players to run through. I'm going to be running through them in alphabetical order of first name. So let's start off with Brandon, a former NFL player, a so-called Renaissance man, and obviously the easy comparison to make here is Danny McCray from 41, also a former NFL player, also of a similar build, and even Brandon mentions that in his bio, to where I was pretty high on Danny in the preseason of 41, and I'm also pretty high on Brandon here in the preseason of 44. And to be honest, I'm probably even more high on Brandon than I was on Danny, where I remember Danny, there was a big portion of his bio they spent largely focusing on how honorable and loyal of a player he was, where Brandon, we don't really have that. Brandon seems to be a big fan of the show and hopefully is instantly recognizing that he might have to play a cutthroat game, but with him also articulating how he is going to be utilizing this meat shield strategy in the game, I do feel like there are a lot of upsides for Brandon, and he is someone that I'm moving forward as a potential winner pick. Next up, we're moving on to Bruce, and Bruce is someone that I'm a bit conflicted on, in the sense that when listening to his interview, I actually thought he seemed kind of fine. He seemed like a likable enough guy, seems like a nice family man. I believe he is the oldest person on this cast, though again, it's still not that old. But after reading his bio, I'll be honest, I really don't get a great sense of how he's going to play. And straight up just looking at this cast, I do see a lot of comparisons to the cast of Survivor 41. And through that, Bruce kind of reminds me of Abraham to a degree. To where while Abraham was a bit more militaristic, I do feel like Bruce kind of gives me a similar vibe to where I could just see him being a relatively early boot. Though based on what we've seen of him, he does seem like a likable enough guy, the one that I just don't know how well he's actually going to do. Next up, moving on to one of the only people I actually remembered from when the cast was originally leaked, and that person is Carolyn, who I believe is a massive fan of Survivor, being a part of the org community, and I remember there was hype around her when the cast was leaked, and I really wanted to be high on Carolyn because of that, though sadly I'm not. I just feel like Carolyn screams out as a very inconsistent player in my eyes. Like, I feel like she is someone that could do very well, though also someone that I could easily see flaming out as well. Now, I will say that I do like her self-awareness, where she talks about how she would like to be comparing herself to the greats, but in reality knows that she's more like Nora, which, again, I did get very Nora vibes from her. Though, again, with this self-awareness and also her being a big fan, I think she'll be a better version of Nora. Though still, any version of Nora is one that I am a bit conflicted on whether or not she could actually do well in terms of winning the game, gaining respect to win a jury vote. I don't know if it's there for Carolyn, and I feel like there is a lot of potential for her to flame out, though she's someone I would like to see do well, but not someone I'm really looking at as a potential winner. Next up, moving on to the youngest person on the cast, and that is Carson. And straight away, I mean, like my other cast assessments, I'm not feeling great about Carson in the sense that he is so young. I do feel like on Survivor, being someone as young as Carson, I feel like it's typically a death knell. While we have seen younger people win in the likes of a Fabio and a Jenna Maraska, I feel like both of those were very wonky wins. And Carson, for me, again, I think can be an extremely high variance player. I think he is a player I could see flaming out in a similar way to how JD did, or I could see him potentially making a deep run, being underestimated. But either way, I just find it tough to believe that Carson's going to gain the respect to win a jury vote. Again, being someone as young as he is, and also coming off as so unthreatening, I feel like he's a player that's just playing when he's a bit too young. I mean, like many people have called out that he's essentially like a younger version of Christian. And while I do think there are differences between the two, I mean, I could see the comparison, obviously. I feel like the two give off very distinct tones, where Christian, being an older version of this archetype, I feel like instantly comes off as threatening, and through that would probably win a jury vote if he gets to the end. While the likes of Carson, I feel like has the opposite effect on people, to where, again, I feel like Carson can be a very high variance player to one that does even make it far, but even if he does, I find it tough to believe that he'll win because that not looking at him too highly either. Next up, moving on to Claire. And Claire is someone that, coming into this, I was kind of expecting her to be kind of similar to Chanel from 42, where they do have similar backgrounds in terms of type of profession and age and location, though I will say I'm probably a lot higher on Claire than I was with Chanel, where unlike Chanel, who came off as very clinical in her preseason, I feel like Claire here comes off a bit more personable, to where despite her having the similar background to someone like a Chanel, the person that actually reminds me the most of Claire in terms of the way that she speaks and how I could see her approaching people is someone like Michelle Fitzgerald. It's where there's points where I'm like listening to her voice, I'm thinking it's Michelle Fitzgerald talking. But I think mixing that in with the fact that she is a fan, someone that I am expecting to play pretty hard, and someone that have this killer instinct, I feel like Claire's someone that I am pretty high on here, to where I am looking at her as a potential winner pick. Next up, we're moving on to Danny, and Danny is someone that I am pretty high on as well. I do feel like Danny is kind of this season's like Tony-esque figure of this guy that seems to be a bit spontaneous, probably someone that's going to play pretty hard, being in a blue-collar profession. Like, he kind of fits that mold, and I did expect to have Danny as a potential winner pick. However, I didn't end up moving him forward, largely because I do feel like Danny did come off as a bit unprepared to me, to where he does talk about how he doesn't really have a game plan coming in, which, to be fair, is not necessarily a death knell there, as obviously you have to be very flexible in the game of Survivor and have to assess things based on the people around you. Though even beyond that, I know we have the story of like that Danny wasn't even the one that applied for the show, and it was like family members that applied for him, and I don't know, I just get the sense that Danny's someone that's maybe not as well prepared as other people, though despite that, again, like I still think Danny is someone that's probably going to do very well here. I'd be surprised if he gets taken out early on in the game. I mean, he seems to be one of the more overtly physical people on this cast, though in that same breath, I would be surprised if he got anywhere towards the end, especially in a winning position, where I think he's one of these type of people that if he does make it far, it's probably because he's either winning out or because he's not as likable as what you would think, in a similar vein to like Jonathan from 42. Though either way, he should be a fun player to watch, and I think there is some upside to him, but again, not a potential winner pick for me. Next up, moving on to Frannie. And Frannie is someone that, I will be honest, I didn't get a great vibe on how Frannie would play the game. I feel like I have a decent sense of her as a character, in the sense that she is kind of someone in a like Kellen or even like a Gabby sort of archetype of the so-called zesty personality, as she puts it. But I really didn't get much sense of how she's going to play the game. I believe she is a fan, so at least there's that. But again, she is also on the younger side of things. She's only 23. And mixing that in with the fact that I just wouldn't be surprised if she's like an early boot. I didn't really feel super confident on Frannie here. Now I could see some potential upside in her, especially if she is able to make it to the merge, though I really just did not get that much of a vibe from her, and because that not moving her forward as a winner pick. Next up, moving on to Heidi, and Heidi's another one that I also did not get the greatest vibe on how they're going to play the game. Now, in her bio and video, she did talk a lot about Sandra and comparing herself to her. Obviously, she is also Puerto Rican, and English is her second language. Which, I mean, like, back in the day, I do feel like that would have been a major downside for you, though I think in the modern day, it isn't as much of an issue. But really, Heidi, I just think can be a very high variance player. Again, another one of these that can be a very early boot, a similar way to how, like, Mariah from 42 was, or how Naka was in 43, though also, again, if she makes it far, she probably has a deep run in her. I don't know why you would really be taking her out in the early merge portion of the game, though also I do wonder how much game ability there really is there. Again, I never really got the sense that she's a super aggressive player, and through that, don't really know if she's likely to win the game, even if she were to get to the end. So again, not someone I'm looking at too highly. Next up, we're moving on to Helen, and Helen is someone that initially I was just kind of fine with. I didn't really have that much of a read on her. However, I feel like when I watched her video and also heard her talk about Erica, I can see Helen doing pretty well if she does try to play to that sort of mold. While I do think, again, she's another one that can be high variance, I think there is the potential of her being an early boot. I do feel like if she were to make it to the merge, again, I could see her easily playing that Erica mold of her kind of sneaking through the early merge portion of the game and then probably being a savvy enough player to take control of the game midway through the merge and then run the game to the end. Like, I could see that path for Helen in the game. That makes me feel like there is this massive upside to her, even though I was a bit unsure about her to begin with. Though at this point, I do feel confident enough to move her as a potential winner pick. Next up, we're moving on to Jamie Lynn. And straight up, Jamie Lynn's another one that I just did not know too much about. I feel like, again, another one that I didn't really get a greatest sense of how she's going to play the game. Now, initially, she did kind of give me Stephanie Johnson vibes to a degree, of her being of a similar age in their 30s and also being a yogi, though outside of that, didn't really give me a great sense of her having that much game ability. I mean, she talks about how the player she's going to be the most like is Angelina of all people, and does end up mentioning loyalty. And again, I don't necessarily think that Jamie is going to be an early boot, though I really just do not get a great sense of her overall potential in the game because that not considering her as a winner pick. Next up, we're moving on to Josh, who is a surgical podiatrist, and at first, I actually felt pretty good about Josh. I feel like his talk about how he's going to try to play like Jeremy Collins, which, I mean, to be fair, a lot of people said that this season, but I kind of saw that as potential upside for him. However, I feel like the more I thought about it and the more I watched his video, he gives me not Jeremy Collins vibes, but instead Jeremy Crawford vibes from David versus Goliath, which largely comes from the fact that Josh is, again, a doctor, a surgeon at that, in which I feel like that's a background that doesn't typically do well in Survivor. I mean, it kind of gives me like Peter Bagintos vibes as well. This kind of like arrogant, overbearing personality. And like, I don't really get that from Josh in his videos. However, I really didn't get that from like Jeremy Crawford either. Yeah, it was there. And overall, those are my worries for Josh, to where, like, on paper, I don't think he's a terrible pick. However, I feel like the more I think about it, the more I'm like, I could see the red flags, and because that, for me, I did not keep him as a winner pick. Next up, we're moving on to the only Canadian on the cast, that being Kane. And I'm conflicted on Kane, where Kane is a massive fan of the show, also seems to be a very intelligent person, of him being a recent law school graduate. However, when watching Kane's actual video, I did feel like he came off a bit awkward to me, where it kind of did give me like Jacob Derwin vibes to a degree, like kind of a mix of like Jacob Derwin and Spencer, which kind of ended up deterring me from being really high on Kane. Now, again, I think there is definitely upside there. Again, he is a massive fan of the show. He openly talks about how he's not there for the journey and isn't there to learn about himself, which I do respect to a degree. But just overall as a player, I could see him being one that's going to flame out, one that plays pretty hard. I mean, he did compare himself to Zeke, which makes me think he's going to be a very aggressive player in the game. And I think through that, just a bit worried about Kane, but someone I do see some upside with, but again, not enough to put as a winner pick. Next up, we're moving on to Lauren, who right away, I did really like Lauren here. She is kind of in the perfect age for Survivor, that being 31. She seems like someone that could be a very solid all-around player, though I feel like there are a couple things that deterred me from picking her as a potential winner pick. One is the fact that she is an elementary school teacher, which obviously a noble profession, but one that kind of gives me this like worry if she's going to be willing to be cutthroat enough in the game, to where while I can definitely see her making a deep run, being a very likable person, being someone that has win equity at the end, I just worry that she's not going to have the killer instinct to actually get to the end. But even beyond that, I feel like another red flag for me is how much she seems to be here for this personal journey. Where kind of in the opposite of Kane, I feel like Lauren here is one that talks a lot about being here for self-growth and discovery, talking about her recent divorce and being a single mother. And I feel like those are worries to me that she might not be all in on the game as much as I would want her to be. So while she was initially someone that I did have in consideration for, so despite her being someone that I initially did have pretty high in my estimations as a potential winner pick, she barely ends up missing the mark here for me. Next up, moving on to someone that I don't think is going to do well, but I really want her to, and that is Maddie. And Maddie just screams out to me right away as this Chelsea Walker, Allie Elliott, Alexis Maxwell, this younger super fan that ends up going out pre-merge. Like, that's just the sense I get from Maddie, is that she fits into that mold. Again, someone that I feel like we get one of every season pretty much. However, beyond that, I feel like also Maddie seems to be coming into this game playing really aggressively, to the point where I can also see these comparisons to someone like a Tori Meehan, to where it does feel like she is wanting to play this game extremely hard. However, I just wonder if she's going to be able to actually do it without it all just blowing up in her face. Like, Maddie to me just kind of screams out as someone that I'm expecting to flame out pretty early on, which I think will be a shame considering I do feel like she could be someone that has a lot of potential in the game and also could be really entertaining to watch considering how active of a game she seems to be wanting to play. But I am really expecting her to kind of overplay her hand. I can also see these comparisons to someone like an Ellie from 43 or even a Sydney from 41, to where I could see her being this like merge boot. Like, I feel like there's so many potential pitfalls for Maddie here, to where despite me really wanting her to do well, I don't really expect it. So again, not a potential winner pick for me. Next up, we're moving on to another one of the bigger question marks in my eyes, and that person is Matt from San Francisco, who again was the person that was the last to get confirmed for the cast when the cast was originally leaked. And Matt is someone that, again, I just did not get the greatest vibe from. Now, I know he is a fan of the game. He has applied beforehand. He's someone that's talked about like his previous failures or what's going to cause him to be a good Survivor player because he's going to know how to respond to adversity. And it's like, again, that sounds good, but also I can kind of see this like Owen-like trajectory for him where just like everything goes wrong for him and him just kind of skating on by. I can also see these comparisons to someone like a High, towards like Matt, someone that like I'm expecting to make a somewhat deep run. Like, I'll be surprised if he's an early boot, though I really don't know how to think about his overall game ability in the long term, where like on paper he seems like the type of person that, yeah, if he gets to the end he probably would at least have a chance, but also I thought that of Owen, and that didn't happen with Owen. And considering the fact that he's already coming off as this like Charlie Brown-esque figure in the preseason here, it's like I don't know how much faith I really have in him to eventually win the game, and even then don't even know if he's going to make it that far. So again, it's not someone I'm particularly high on, but not really particularly low on either, but again, not a potential winner pick for me. Next up, we're moving on to the other Matt on this cast. We have Matthew, which I guess that's how they're going to distinguish them here. It's just one's Matt and one's Matthew, I guess. And Matthew is someone here that I really instantly like. I thought he had a really fun energy in his video to where he should be a very likable social presence on his tribe. He also is a massive fan of the show, talking about how he's a fan since day one, which makes me think that he should be a somewhat savvy player, though I will also say that he does seem to be very much into the survival aspects of the game, talking about how he always loved camping, and that might be a bit of a red flag to a degree. Also, he is 43, which is one of the older guys on this cast, but again, still not that old, and should have a decent amount of life experience here. And like overall, I think there's a lot to like from Matthew here. I feel like he's someone that I could very much see being the central figure within his starting tribe, and then potentially run the game post-merge. So because I'm moving him on as a potential winner pick. Next, I'm moving on to another person I'm a bit unsure about, and that person is Sarah. And Sarah's bio really just came off as kind of generic to me, where I really didn't get a great sense of how she's going to play from her bio. Now, I believe in her video, she did mention wanting to play like Andrea, which maybe I can see that from her. I mean, she also mentions looking up to Stephanie, Suri, and Parvati, though again, those all feel like kind of generic answers there. But really, like as a whole, I mean, she seems like a pretty well-rounded player. I mean, she seems to be one of the more physical women on this cast, where she talks about loving the outdoors and playing beach volleyball. She constantly talks about being strategic and being logical in her bio, and also mentions being willing to make moves against her alliance when the timing is right. Like, she seems to have everything good on paper here, though a lot of it just comes off as like kind of generic to me, to where like while I could definitely see a lot of upside in Sarah here, she kind of comes off as like a bit too perfect, which made me hesitant to pick her, so she didn't move on as a potential winner pick for me. And the final person here, the person that I'm expecting to be the star of the show, the person that had a great introduction in the original preview, and then also has just such a fun energy in his video. We do have Jam Jam, who I just love. Like, I just love him as a character right away. I mean, he kind of feels like this mix of like a Nasir and a Marianne, this really over-the-top energy that I'm expecting him to be a massive character on this season. The question is, how is he going to be as a player? And that is where I'm a bit more unsure. I do feel like he comes off as a fan of the show. He seems like a type of person that is going to be very well liked by the majority of the cast. I just wonder if anyone's actually going to really want to work with him, where again, I feel like in a similar way to how Nasir had his run play out, where people seem to always be kind of sketched out by Nasir. I do worry about something like that with Jam Jam here, and then also mixing in the fact that he just seems so likable that I can't imagine anyone actually wanting to go to the end with him. Like, I feel like those are major red flags for me, but he just seems like an incredible character that I really am hoping does well. And to be honest, I don't really expect him to be an early boot either. I just don't really see how he really progresses beyond that like final 7, final 8 portion of the game. But there we go. I mean, that's the entire cast of Survivor 44. Now let's talk about my potential winner pick. So the people that I've narrowed this down to are Brandon, Claire, Helen, and Matthew. And I think the first person I'm going to drop out of this group for me is going to be Helen here. I feel like Helen is a player that I feel like there's still a level variance with, where I feel like my top 3, I feel pretty confident that all 3 of them are going to probably make somewhat deep runs on the season, where Helen, again, I think can win the game and would probably have a decent chance of it if she makes the merge, though I think there is that worry of, is she even going to get there? So again, not going to pick her here. Now, between these top 3, I feel like it is pretty close, where I feel like on any previous list, all 3 of these could have been my potential winner pick. However, the next person I'm going to drop out is going to be Brandon. And I feel like this is because I feel like Brandon, despite him talking about his strategy of using meat shields, I just don't know if it's going to be as effective as he would want it to be. I mean, obviously we saw Danny do it somewhat effectively, though even then it kind of blew up on his face by the end of it. I feel like Brandon kind of seems like, again, a potentially better version of Danny, but I think through that can also come off as a bit more threatening than Danny. to where I just worry about his overall threat management by the end of the season. I feel like it's tough to see Brandon actually making it to the very end unless he just wins out. So because that, again, not going to pick him as my winner pick. And now we're down to 2. We're down to Claire and Matthew, who are 2 very different potential winner picks here. And to be honest, even now, I'm still very conflicted on where exactly to go here. Where I think both of these players are players that I'm expecting to make somewhat deep runs. I would be surprised if either of them were to be particularly early boots here. I feel like both of them still seem like people that might struggle to get to the very end, kind of for 2 radically different reasons. I feel like they are people that are going to play very different games. So I think for my winner pick for this season, I'm going to try to shake it up a bit. I think I'm going to pick someone that, I think I'm going to go with the opposite of who I would typically pick as my winner pick, considering it hasn't really worked out in recent seasons. So the person I'm going to pick as my winner pick here is Claire. And again, straight up, like when I first saw the cast right off the bat, my initial inkling was to pick Matthew. I did feel like Matthew seems to have the life experience, seems to be a somewhat well-rounded player, seems to be a very likable presence, but also one that, again, like I just feel like he's going to be too likable. I feel like if he is getting towards the end of the game, I feel like he is going to start to get targeted as this very likely person to win at the end. And while I can see Claire also being a target by the end of the game, I feel like it would be for a different reason. I feel like it would be more of a target because of her status as a player, more so than this inherent likability, which I feel like is easier to quell that level of threat management over this inherent likability. But also beyond that, like I kind of see this dichotomy in Claire, this player that can play very hard and through that gain the respect to win a jury vote, but also have this like Michelle Fitzgerald style energy that might not make her a big enough threat to where people are directly targeting her for a lot of her run. Like I feel like Claire kind of screams out as this nice enough middle for me to where while yes, I can definitely see this like Shan like trajectory for Claire here, I do feel like there is enough upside there for me to make her my winner pick for this season. But there we go. I mean, those are my thoughts on the cast of Survivor 44. Now, moving forward, I will be doing similar content for Survivor 44 as I've done for previous seasons. Obviously, I'll be doing a mid-season power ranking around the time of the merge, along with a really massive review at the end of the season, and then also a player ranking to follow that. Also, if you want to hear my thoughts on the season as it's going on, you can follow me at Twitch at twitch.tv/TheMarineReview, where hopefully I'll be streaming every Wednesday at 11 p.m. Eastern Time after the episodes, as long as I don't have internet issues. But also, I have some pretty big videos coming up in the near future as well. I mean, the Survivor to Amazon retrospective should be the video coming out after this one. Along with next Saturday will be the 4-year anniversary of the channel. And along with that will be my ranking of every Big Brother Canada player ever. So that's something. And also in terms of Survivor, by the end of 44, I plan on having videos like a loved one visit ranking out, a favorite character for every season, a couple top 10s, a video on the game deciding vote for every season. So I definitely have some Survivor videos planned moving forward, along with coverage of shows like Australian Survivor Heroes vs. Villains, which is currently airing, and BB Can 11 will also air, the Challenge World Championship, the Challenge Rider Dies. So again, there's a lot going on, so stay tuned for videos on those things, but for now, that's the video. Thank you for watching.